Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. With me, as always, is my fellow soldier of cinema, Mr. Cullen McFader.
Hello.
What's up? What's up, dude?
Not much. Not much. Been a while.
It has been a while. I mean, not that our listeners would know, but because our release schedule is often different than our recording schedule, but it has been a little bit of a break. Oh, yeah, by the way, and I'm Clark Coffey. Just in case you didn't know. But yeah, yes. I've been away. I've been away for 3 weeks in France, and you've been busy, and you're gonna actually get ready soon to go on your own wild worldwide adventure. We could talk about that later.
Mad world.
But for now, in episode 52, we're going to discuss My Neighbor Totoro, which is your pick from 1988, directed by Hayao
Miyazaki.
Hayao Miyazaki.
You did call that. You predicted it.
I did.
You could have put money on it.
I always feel so bad because obviously the reason that these are sometimes difficult to pronounce is because there's our names that aren't common in my culture, and then it makes me feel culturally inadequate, and then I feel like it's also rude, so I apologize. But moving on from that, but yeah, so this is your pick. I think this is the first animated film that we've ever done. Is that the case? This is our first animated film, so I'm really excited and interested to see how this discussion goes. I'll do like a big disclaimer here real quick, which is that although I very much like animated films, I am not even anywhere remotely as educated, or at least I feel inadequate almost when discussing animated films because I know so little about the process of how animated films are made. I've never made one myself, whereas, of course, I've shot live action stuff many times before. So I feel like I'm so much more equipped to discuss a live action film. Whereas with an animated film, I really feel out of my depth. So,
well, I mean, I'm the same way. I know next to nothing in terms of the technical aspects of.
But we can still watch it and discuss it as an audience, right?
Yeah, I did do a lot of stop motion as a kid, but that, by and large, is much more similar to live action than it is
I mean, I didn't do much, but I did do some, and my stop motion films consisted of me taking my toys, like my G.I. Joe and Transformer and He-Man action figures, which might date me just a little bit there, especially with the He-Man stuff, and basically, I remember I would like attach like a pencil, like I could glue like a pencil to their head or something, or I would try to like hold them like out of frame, and I would basically barely, it was not even, most of it wasn't even actually stop motion. I think I only did that once or twice. Mine was mostly like puppeting. That's what you'd more accurately call my work would have been. I puppeted using these action figures.
I did like all of my early movies as a kid were all stop motion. I did a lot of like Lego stop motion and like used the action figures and stuff. I loved it. And but that's the closest to animation.
I don't want to get too far off, but how did you do a frame by frame then? Because I'm assuming you had like tape, right? You had a video camera. Is that how did you do? Stop motion?
Well, I used to. I mean, when I started and was using the video camera, it would just be a really quick press of the record and really quick press of the
because you can't really get an actual frame.
You can't get a still. And then I got a really, really early Canon. I think they were called like Cybershot back in the day. It was like early
one of the early digital cameras.
Like digital cameras. Or my mom got it. I didn't get it, and so I used to use that. And at that point, then, of course, you can just take pictures. Although, my first stop motion ever was using Lego released a camera. It was like a webcam that you could put into your computer via USB.
You're so much younger than me. You're when you're a kid, you had webcams.
Although these things looked... Well, this...
When I was a kid, we didn't have the web,
7 or
dude.
8. That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is probably when I was 8, 7. I went to a stop motion camp. And that was where I did my first stop motion ever. And I shouldn't say my first movies were stop motion. My first movies were much like yours, video camera with the action figures and my
You're like
my hands off
puppeting
screen.
them. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And then I got into stop motion, but I did, in terms of animation, do a unit of like Adobe Fireworks at school when I was in high school.
I never
and
used
Comtech,
Fireworks.
and so I had very, very limited understanding of the frame by frame, which we'll get into later when we get into the technical elements, because there's one specific thing that I learned from that I think plays into this conversation. But I do want to also get the spoiler out of the way, the big twist, which is that I assume that when I suggest this movie, in case I assume for people who've been watching,
the big twist is that Cat Bus has balls.
That Cat Bus has balls. Yes, that's the. We might as well end it right there.
Oh gosh! Now we're gonna have to put a mature on our.
That's explicit.
was that really what you were going to say?
No,
that wasn't what you were going to say.
But for people who've been watching a long time, I can assume that you figured out that that we go back and forth on our choices. That Clark will choose a movie a week, and I'll choose a movie.
Yep.
And so I assume, Clark, that when I chose this movie, you had probably thought that I had either watched this movie when I was a kid or had an experience with it. But no, this is a movie that I watched the first time in January of this year.
Yeah, so I was totally surprised by that, because of course, I mean, obviously I know you didn't watch it when it came out, because it came out in 88.
Yeah, 10 years before I was born.
But yeah, I did assume that you probably had a relationship with this film that went back when you were much younger. So I am pretty surprised that you had only just recently seen this film.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that was the thing, is that it was kind of twofold for me. One was that we hadn't done animation yet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Just to see what we have to say about it. Even
and
though,
you
again,
picked a
neither
good
of us
one.
are technically, proficient in terms of animation, or super knowledgeable about the craft of animation. I think it just kind of puts us more into the shoes of like an average audience member.
Right.
Much more than somebody looking on it with the eye of a creator in that way.
Yeah.
And the second reason that I wanted to was because this is, again, one of those like rare movies that I watched the first time as an adult. This is, of course, unabashedly, this is a children's movie. It's made for children.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was kind of blown away, and I'd seen Ghibli movies before. I'd seen Spirited Away, and I'd seen Princess Mononoke and all those Howl's Moving Castle, and I was like blown away by how inspired I was by this movie that I started wanting to write, my own. I've always had a desire to not solely make kids content, but I think that like making a children's movie would be a lot of fun, and I've always kind of wanted to do that, and this really like brought me into this mode of like where I've been plotting up this kids movie, and it also just, for a movie that I did not grow up with, for a kids movie that I did not grow up with, I feel such a strong connection to this movie after only having seen it 4 months ago for the first time.
Yeah,
and
that's
I've watched
interesting.
it like 4 times since then.
Yeah.
Something just really bit me with this movie.
And I'm interested too, because I mean, I don't mean to say this in any kind of derogatory way, but you're not far removed from your childhood.
No,
relative to me, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that this film has such a nostalgic effect on you when you've not, you're a young adult and you're not too far removed from your childhood. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
I wonder, what do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, because we one of the first movies that we did when we were getting out of the Herzog kind of phase was E.T.
Oh, yeah, I think that was the first one, right?
Yeah, and I sort of said that, like, I grew up, I was the younger sibling, and I always, like, growing up with E.T., like, with the movie, always really, really related to Elliot in that movie.
Yeah, sure.
Because he's the younger sibling, he's kind of, like, teased by his older brother and his friends. And
I related to him, and I didn't even,
Yeah, he's technically the middle child, but his younger sister is sort of more of a secondary character in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same thing here, whereas like of course this movie's about 2 sisters, Satsuke and Mei.
Mm-hmm.
And, I watched this movie and I think that they're both really well written and well crafted and well rounded characters. But like, there's something about Mei that I just feel like, speaks to me so like on such a profound and like
That's
fundamental
so intriguing,
level.
Because I mean, it's a 4-year-old. I think she's like kind of
4
4 years old,
girl.
and so she's very, very young.
But I remember the exact the feeling of like curiosity and just wanting to I grew up outside of Toronto, and there's like a big nature kind of, not preserve, but there's like a very large forest. It's like in a marsh down by the lake near my house. And I, grew up a lot in there, and like going down to the lake, and there was always turtles and deer, and sometimes deer would be on my front lawn in the morning and things like that. And so I always had this very, very, insightful curiosity about nature, and I don't even think, as a kid you're not really thinking about it as nature, you're just thinking about it as like the surroundings of where you live. And watching the way that May in this movie explores, with like such a bravery too, that there's so many moments in a lot of other movies that are similar. The opening of this movie is them getting to their house and they find out it's haunted. And instead of their reaction being, horrified, they're like, we're going to march around the house and get to the bottom of this. And then,
it's a mixture, right? It's a mixture of a little bit of fear, but excitement, curiosity. It's a mixture of those things, which I think
that spoke, it just, really speaks to me on kind of like, I really, really relate to just that feeling. And I'm sure that a lot of other people do too. Like, I don't think that, I'm unique in having been a curious child.
Sure.
But I will say that this movie is unique in portraying children like that. In sort of not dumbing it down and not simplifying the kids. May is, again, like we said, she's 4 years old in this. But she really acts like an authentic child. She's not, like, it doesn't feel like she's someone written by an older man. It feels like she's like a real, and of course she's, animated, so it's not like there's a physical actor portraying this role.
Well, there is an actor portraying the role,
but
we'll
not
talk about that
in a physical sense. But you just, the detail, the level of authenticity, and the just truthfulness, I think, in the way that these characters are written, in the way that they're animated, I think is enough to really make me, I'm turning 24 very soon,
you old
in a
man.
month. I know, I'm elderly. But the fact that a movie that I'm seeing for the first time at this age can make me so fundamentally relate to a 4-year-old girl, right? It's like that. How does that happen? Like it just kind of speaks to the level of which this, I think, is just really, purely genius in a way.
Well, I think, obviously it's so I'll rewind real quick too, to get myself up to speed with where you're at, which is, we kind of understand when and where and how you came to this film. So for me, I had seen other films, the Ghibli films. I had seen, I think pretty much the same ones that you saw. I've seen, and because my wife really likes these films too, and we usually will watch them together. We've seen like Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. So I've seen a handful of these films. So, but I hadn't seen this film. I definitely heard of it because it is regularly on like the top, of the like best animated films of all time list, right? I mean, so this film is universally loved. But it's critically and commercially, it's been very successful. Which even in around the world, it's my understanding it's extremely popular, and its characters are kind of part of the pop culture in Japan to much greater extent. But
there's a Totoro house somewhere in Japan.
There is.
The house is like built.
So I mean, a lot of people I think feel very much the way you feel. And when I watched the film for the first time, I mean, these are some of the biggest impressions that I had as well. I'm about 20 years older than you, so I experience it maybe a little bit differently, but very much. I mean, immediately the way I kind of translated it was this. It's very much a film, I think, that's about exploration, that's about curiosity, and there isn't this overriding huge strong plot. It's not a plot driven film. It's not a conflict driven film. It's not a protagonist antagonist film. It's a lot of things. We could talk about this a little more, but these modern Pixar and Disney movies follow a pretty strict formula, and that formula absolutely involves a protagonist and antagonist. It involves the hero going through this challenge, and then coming out on the other side a stronger, better person, etc. None of that happens in this film. This film is not about that. This film is really about, in my mind, it's about exploration. It's about curiosity, and it's about a connection to your environment. And for me, really the nostalgic kind of connection I had with it was, I used to go to my parents' farm, not my parents' farm, I'm sorry, my grandparents' farm when I was a kid. It was maybe like a 2 or 3 hour drive, something like that, to my grandparents' farm. They lived on a working farm. They retired when I was, I think, like 10 or so, but they still lived on the farm. I'd go with my parents, and of course I would run around, just this huge rural area with like nothing but this, house and then farmland everywhere, But my grandparents had like, and so I would just like run around on this farm all by myself when I was young, and you just explore stuff. You're like, well, what's over here? What's over there? And
it's pick up a stick and it's a sword. And,
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And they used to burn their trash. So they had this like huge, like, area where they burned trash, and it would be like all of these like treasures of like, old aerosol cans or like tractor parts or, all this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, my God, in my mind, I'm like, on adventures for hours and hours and hours by myself, from like dusk till dawn. You're just like, and so I felt like a real connection to that, where it was like this combination of exploration and childhood imagination and turning everything into an adventure. Cause it is new, right? When you're young, almost everything you experience is new, and your imagination is vivid. And so it's this really beautiful combination of experiencing things for the first time, your imagination running wild with it. So I felt that big time. It also was really overwhelmingly charming and sincere and kind and soft in a way, kind of.
Yeah.
But
totally.
not saccharine, not fake, like emotionally authentic, which is what you had talked about. And there is some melancholy in it with the sick mother, so it's not that we've removed aspects of life that, involve suffering or any, I mean, that's there too. Challenge and loss is kind of in that. But yeah, I sense all these things that you sense. It was really quite a like a pleasant, not feel good, but kind of, I guess nostalgic.
It sort of feels like just kind of like experiencing, like that's kind of the MO of the movie, is just like that you're experiencing these things with these kids, and
a sense of wonder. I feel like a sense of wonder and a sense of like kind of, and I had this thought, I was like, God, if I had kids, and for like a tenth of a second, I had this thought of like, oh man, I'm kind of sad I don't have kids.
Yeah,
like
it'd be a great
so that was
thing
weird. Like I had so my wife and I, we don't have children, and we don't have plans to have children. But this film, for like half a second, I was like, ooh, should I rethink that?
This movie, I totally feel that as well. Like this movie makes you like just on a very weird level, almost like want to be a parent.
Like okay. Well,
so
because
I think
it's so idealized. Like the father-daughter's relationship is very idealized. The rural setting is very idealized. There's this,
and everyone's happy, and
there's this like sense of community and just. Yeah, I mean, so in a sense, even though we do have the sick mother, but even that, her illness is kind of idealized in a sense.
Well, I think the other thing too is that it's everyone is, there's such a tranquility with the way that they deal with the problems in the film.
Yeah,
there's not many.
That's a good way to put it.
There's no antagonist. There's no, but even in the moments when the sisters are fighting, or May, the younger one,
it's going to be
crying,
okay.
You know it's going to be okay, but you also get to kind of see the process with these kids deal with this stuff, and kind of put it into perspective. The moment when they're running home in the rain and May slips and falls and like face first into a puddle of mud, and then stands up and is just kind of staring starstruck at the fact that she just did that, and then before she can even start crying, Satsuki comes and pulls her along because they got to get out of the rain, and then 5 seconds later, May is kind of proud of herself for not having cried.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those things that, everybody kind of remembers that feeling of like, oh, I fell and scraped my knee and I didn't cry. And I'm so proud of myself for not crying.
Yeah.
So it's so, I think, so simple, and it's a really great, if you have children, a really great, I think, way to show kids that, like, you can have issues in life and that's fine. You can the best thing to do is to like deal with those issues. I think it's very authentic in that way. And I know that Miyazaki's kind of like overarching theme when creating the movie was just that he wanted children to be able to say, like, it's wonderful to be alive. And I think that's the other thing about the sort of darker elements of the film, which there are, again, nothing too dark in this movie. The mother's sick, and the kids are, of course, dealing with it. The dad's in Tokyo working a lot, and so they're alone plenty of times. And there's a lot of scenes where it's like it just feels very authentic in when Satsuke's at school and Granny brings May. They're not the real grandmother, but she's kind of like a, babysitting the kid.
Neighbor,
she lives nearby.
like an older neighbor, yeah.
My neighbor Granny. And she brings May to the school, and May is just like sort of crying because she just wanted to be with her sister at school. And she's, obviously these kids are, I think that the genius element of the writing of this movie is that they understand that the kids are dealing with this stuff, but they treat it in a way that kids would treat it, which is not really being able to vocalize that and say that. So when the mother is unable to come home from the hospital and you've got the two kids fighting, and May's response is just to say that it's not fair and to start crying, and the girls start yelling at each other, and like that's totally how a child would react to that situation. They wouldn't express their feelings, they wouldn't express their emotions. The older sibling, of course, would get frustrated and just yell at the kid and call them a baby. And that one scene, that's like one of my favorite moments in the movie, just because it's dealing with these things in such a just, again, an authentic way that I think a lot of movies would make superfluous. They would make them kind of not superfluous.
Well, they would make them overly dramatic.
Yeah, and they would and
often children characters.
It would end with them talking to each other about why they felt that
like
way.
Adults.
And there would be a very
overly
clear
articulate
lesson and moral of the story. Whereas this really just, it kind of, I think, on the inverse, and I think this goes well with what you were saying about how it's like the characters don't really change too much through the movie. That it's more so about, where you see a Pixar movie that's about like big change and overcoming obstacles and being a better person on the other side. I think the kind of like motif with this movie is just kind of almost like being comfortable and happy and learning to accept where you are and kind of like live in that moment and just kind of accept that and make the best out of that moment rather than solving every problem.
Well, and it's not a question we can answer here, I don't think. Certainly, it's an area that I am not an expert in, but it's one of the most interesting things to me. I mean, maybe it is the most interesting thing to me about this film from a thematic perspective, which what you just described. And you can compare this film to its contemporary, its equivalents in North America. And of course, you're going to compare that to Disney films, to Pixar films, which is one of the same now. But I'm curious. I mean, and I think it probably does speak to maybe a fairly substantial cultural difference. In North America, we have a very specifically type of aspirational society, and our films often mirror this, and especially I feel like in these Pixar and Disney films, right? It's every one of these films is about a personal journey of growth, right? I mean, they're always about you have a character, they start out at place A, they're confronted with a challenge, it's scary and harrowing, and they have to,
it's the hero's journey.
It's the hero's journey is exactly what it is. And then, and then they come out at the end and they've learned something, they've grown, they're at a better place, they're a better person. And it's interesting to I feel like so much, and I'm a big fan of the hero's journey, and I'm a big fan
Hmm.
of films like that, but I often wonder what the cost of almost all of our stories being that is.
Hmm.
I wonder if we have oversaturated our stories are such an important part of how we like learn to relate to our world and to ourselves. And I almost wonder if we've gotten to a place of like over aspirational where it's just, if you're not constantly working on being a quote unquote better person, whatever the heck that means, if you're not always looking to the future, like then you're doing something wrong, you're failing as a human almost.
Hmm.
And I am so appreciative of uh this other way of looking at things, which is to be present in the moment, to be accepting of yourself, to realize that, because in a certain sense there's like a real egotism to this other way of looking at things, where the world around you is there to make you a better person in a
Hmm.
way, right? Like
Hmm.
there's an antagonist. There's like these things in the world that are there to present challenges to you so that you can grow and get better. It's like
And
a
learn a
super
lesson from
ego.
them.
It's like a
Yeah.
super like egocentric way of looking at the world, right? Like
Hmm.
it's there for you to get better, and the reason for your existence is for you to become a better person. That's so different than the world is there for you to develop a relationship with it,
Hmm.
and the world is there for you to be curious about,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe even serve, as opposed to expect that world to serve you in your personal growth journey. And there I wish that I were more educated in more aspects of Japanese culture. There are aspects that I am a little bit familiar with that are really intriguing to me. um and this animism, and is that right,
The
animism
animism. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
part of it. I feel, and maybe we all feel like this to some extent. I don't know if you do, I'm curious, but I feel like I almost have this like innate thing that I do with inanimate objects, where I kind of give them a life and a story, and sometimes it's almost even hard to like throw something away because I feel
Hmm.
like almost like I'm hurting
It's
something.
got attachment. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
or that, not even if like personally attached, but I'm like, oh man, I'm like hurt. Like this thing is it somehow
Hmm.
has some kind of soul, or it has some kind of, the way I kind of define it is that everything has a story behind it. Like it was,
Hmm.
there's a story. Like this thing had a life somehow, and like how did it get to me? How did it get to here? And there's like a life to it almost. So there's like this way that I feel like I kind of relate to that.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because just for those who don't know, animism is kind of the idea that like every item, object, element in nature, rock, like
has kind of like a
animal,
soul or a
even
spirit.
words can have, yeah, like a soul or spirit or is some sort of, connection. And I'm not a spiritual or a religious
You're
person.
not a
And as far as I
supernatural,
know,
right?
you're not either. But
Correct.
I think that to a very like you know beautiful degree, I believe in magic. It just may not be the magic that is usually defined as magic.
Right.
I think that there is a wonder to the world,
Right.
that just happened to come about, which I think is spectacular. That
Hmm.
these elements are so perfectly in play that we can experience these things. And so I think, so when I say I'm not spiritual, I mean more so in the, yeah, exactly, the supernatural sense of the word. I don't believe that,
You still have awe. You still
but there's
experience
exactly
awe, yeah, and
there's an
mystery.
element to which I can still, um, you know, completely grasp all these elements and believe in them, just in perhaps a slightly different way than a religious person would believe in them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big part of it, is just that and I think what you described as it being like stories is a really good way to describe it.
Yeah. That's how I relate it to
I've got
myself.
this
Yeah.
this this funny kind of thought that keeps coming up for me, is that like when you die, the moments that you experienced on your own in a way cease to exist,
Hmm.
because if your memory is the only thing that really preserved those moments and you were the only person to observe those moments and experience them, then by all metrics, when the one single person who experienced those things passes on and or if you don't believe there's an afterlife, ceases to exist in that moment, then so do all those memories. And so I think that that's a really, you know, interesting way to look at that. And some people may think that's a sad thing. I don't. I think that's more of a beautiful thing in a way, that these moments are yours, and it's kind of like experiencing them with these moments and elements and objects that have stories of their own, that there's all these things that you as a person, simply because you're experiencing them, can put on those elements. And I think that that's kind of, to me, a lot of you know, I don't know if that's an intentional thing. I would doubt that it was an intentional element in the movie, but that's something that I also get out of the movie, is just that those moments where you're alone as a child, running around and exploring. And, you know, maybe I didn't run into a giant Totoro in my, you know, the forest near my house and have a magical experience where I flew
but
away on a cat
there was something
bus.
in your imagination that when
But
you were a child,
exactly,
that is
you're
similar.
still you have, you know, the shadows on the ground that are cast by trees can turn into to, you know, goblins, and the clouds are castles and things like that. And I think that that's something that this movie really
Gets
explores, but not in a literal sense. It just
Yeah.
it kind of just lives in those elements.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something I want to touch on real quick, because you talk about kind of the fleeting nature of things, and how, as opposed to feeling sad about that, you feel like there's a beauty there. And I think that's another thing. So I'll probably butcher the exact pronunciation, but in the Japanese have a phrase, mono no aware, which is like that it is actually the reason things are beauty. And this is my own interpretation of this. I'm not saying this is like, but my interpretation of this kind of philosophy is that the fleeting nature of things is kind of what gives them their beauty. To recognize that all things are fleeting, so including childhood. And I think that's one of the reasons that you can look at this film and with such love in your heart for these characters, is that because we all know that childhood is fleeting. And that's, you know, and it stays with us. We have like this little kernel, you know, we always kind of carry that child with us inside of us for the rest of our life. But childhood does transform into something else. We turn into adults. You can't hold on to it forever. You shouldn't, right? You're refusing to accept the call of life if you were to stay a child forever. But that beauty kind of stays inside of us in like this little
It informs
place.
us in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And oh my gosh, does it ever inform us? Absolutely. But I think that's kind of, it's not explicitly stated that you know, their childhood is going to end. But I think that is a part of the beauty of this, is that we know that it will. And we've all lost a certain amount of innocence, and we've all lost a certain amount, you know, and of course the people who made this film are adults, and they've gone through that process themselves. So it's kind of this interesting thing when you look back and try to recreate childhood in a piece of fiction, that you're kind of looking back on your own childhood now as an adult, and you're kind of interpreting that, or trying to represent that in a work of art. But I think that's a big part of this, and I think it's a big part of our experience. And I almost wonder, you know, you having more recently transitioned from a child to an adult, it's interesting. My hypothesis is that maybe that's a big part of why it was such really grabbed you. Because that transition's kind of fresh maybe for you.
Yeah, there's still, and you know, and I also, I think that even beyond being close to childhood, you know, I also work with kids. You know, I actually last night was my final,
you teach,
potentially my final film class ever.
Oh wow!
So there was a little bit of nostalgia.
Probably not ever. I don't think
there.
It's your last film class ever. I'm sure
it could
will
be.
Teach again in your life.
Yes, but
you have many years left. Where
you know,
it
was a lot of the students had been with me for like 5-6 years. And you know, now they're all going off to university, and it's like I'd watch these kids grow up. And there's a chance that I will go back. It's not. It just depends on where my life is in September. But so I think that also, not that specific thing that I had last night, but just the fact that I'm around kids a lot, and I think that also kind of brings an element. And I do also want to touch on one really quick thing, which is and this is related to what we're talking about, that so there's a fan theory online, and I've
Oh
heard people
yeah,
I know talk about this.
you exposed me to
And
this. I didn't.
yeah,
I
and I
wasn't
think
aware.
that
Yeah.
yeah, and it's actually got a lot of traction, weirdly, which is that at the end of the film, there's a theory that the Mei and Satsuki die.
Mm-hmm.
That they are, that when Mei runs away, that the idea of them being saved by the cat bus and by Totoro is them like transitioning into the spirit world because they've both died.
Which is so
And I have
interesting
friends
because I didn't think that at all.
when I said I first watched this movie back in January, they're like, "Oh yeah, and that ending is so sad how they're dead."
Oh,
And I was like,
wow.
"That's so strange." And I think that so. Firstly, on a like a literal level, Miyazaki and Ghibli have said that no, this is not the case.
Right.
Like that they're alive.
You can
at
look
the
it
end.
up, and they've explicitly said that's not our intention.
There's also
Yeah.
at the end of the movie, you see them embracing Granny, and then the credits are them like growing up with a younger, like they have a new sibling, and so
And
there's
you
all
said
that.
there
There's
was a
also
short film.
Yeah, so there's a short 13-minute short film called May and the Kitten Bus, which came out in
But I didn't think
2000s.
this for a moment. Yeah, I was surprised to even hear
that's
this was. Yeah.
a sequel. It's a sequel to the movie, so they're very much alive. I didn't. Me neither. When that was said to me, I was like, what?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that the reason for that is that a lot of people, and especially as you get into adulthood, they need there to be a grounding aspect on the magic.
You can't just
Whereas
accept
what I
the
think
surreal.
is exceptional about this movie is that it is magical. There is no explanation for it, and I think that Miyazaki is a really great. It's not a direct quote, so I'll
Paraphrase.
I'll paraphrase for a second, but it was essentially when someone was like asking what the like function of the Totoros are, like what do they do in the forest? Are they forest guardians? Are they? And he was like, well, sort of, but that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because they're not guarding anything. There's nothing in
and
the
he
film.
He was like they're just it's as much as if they went through and explained that in the film, what would be the point of that?
Yeah.
I don't. When I was a child, I didn't see this like great big tree on the front of my schoolyard and think that it had to have some sort of, you just think that it's something that's sort of magical because it's a huge tree. And to relate to the idea of like animism for a moment too, that tree, when I was this is elementary school, when I was, I think in grade 4 or 5, they cut it down because it was really old, and it was this huge, probably, I don't know how many, how high it was, but it was very big. It was probably 3 times as high as the school itself.
Wow.
Huge. And really, really big trunk and all that. And it was right on the front.
It's a shame it had to be cut down.
Yeah, and it was just at that point, it was really old and it was a safety hazard. But I remember it was like this every kid at the school, without even really talking about it, had this like profound sadness about the loss of this tree, like it was like a friend of ours, and nobody had ever talked about it before. It wasn't like I came into class and said like, isn't it so sad that the tree is gone? Like we all just kind of like were walking home from school and saw the stump and just sort of stood there for 5 minutes looking at the thing, and it was like, so I think that there is a very fundamental element to childhood that kind of sees that you personify things, and you animism is quite
I just have a thought. I just had a thought.
Yeah.
Okay. And this will be fun because we can tie it back to our roots with this podcast a little bit, which was our focus on Werner Herzog. But do you remember when we were kind of rolling through some of his films, and we were talking about like a landscape of the soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And how Herzog would. And I feel like this is really a strength of it. He finds these really beautiful landscapes that when he films them and puts them in the context of the films he makes, I mean, they're the really extraordinarily effective at conveying some kind of like primal kind of something about what it is to be human and live in our world. And I almost feel like maybe this film, in a way, with those characters it's almost like a totally different way to represent a landscape of the soul, and how our landscapes affect us and how we interact with them, and how, I mean, because I'm trying to articulate this thought as it's like still developing in my mind here. So I'm hanging out there on a wire, but I don't know if does this make sense a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
And it's just, and so having these characters, having the Totoro and the cat bus and everything, instead of trying to define them right as like, okay, they're guardians, and now we're gonna the film's gonna have some plot where they have to, they're at risk, and they have to work together with the humans, or it'd be something like that in a lot of North American animated films, but they're just kind of there, and there is interaction with them and the characters, but it's really, and they're just kind of assumed, right? They're not questioned. It's not like, oh wow, it's like, but I think it's just maybe another interesting way to kind of articulate or work at a sideways way of articulating a child's relationship with your environment. And I don't know.
Well, there is actually somewhat of a connection.
More how I see it, yeah.
There, because I remember when we were talking about Herzog, and then we did, I think the first Malick movie we did was Thin Red Line.
Yeah.
And we discussed sort of in that episode how there is somewhat of a relationship between Malick and Herzog, and they know each other in real life, and there's a lot of similarities. And there's also, I don't know to what degree they know each other, but Malick and Miyazaki are very, in a lot of ways, similar filmmakers, in that there's this element of nature kind of superseding like everything, but not divorced from humanity. That like humanity is a part of that nature, and I see that a lot. I know Miyazaki is really, really into environmentalism, and is as Japan is a very environmentally conscious country, just period. There's a lot of environmentalism there. And so I think it's just interesting how that it's like you said, it's not that these, like, they're the Totoro's, the spirits, the soot gremlins that are in the house are as much a part of the landscape as the trees and as the rivers and all that. And so I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, as that those things, they affect the person. You grow from interaction with those things much more than from defiance or overcoming or something like that of those things. And I think that's true to real life. I think that as a child, you're much more influenced by the passive elements of life than you are by, like, I think the precedents that, and I'm sure that it's not just Western culture that puts the precedents on this, but having grown up in Canada, I definitely had this, that the precedence is always put on like the big life lessons that you learn, and like that, like, well, that's what shapes you, is the hard times and the big breakup, or the losing a family member for the first time. That's what's going to shape you. But I've found, at least for me, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of people, that what shaped me as a person more so was the passive everyday elements, that just where did I grow up? How do those things kind of like diffuse into me? Much more than the things that in my brain I could compartmentalize and be like, well, what did I learn when, I was rejected for the first time or whatever like that. And I think that this movie really touches into that.
Well, let's talk.
Should we get into maybe the technical? Let's
get a little bit. Let's touch base on some of these things, because there's definitely some interesting technical topics to discuss with the film. So, one of the things that I think is immediately obvious when you're looking at an animated film is that usually you and I will talk about the cinematography. We'll talk about get into some of that technically. The cinematography. I mean, there's definitely a cinematographer or a director of photography on an animated film, and a camera was actually used to make this, but cinematography is a totally different, I'm imagining, is a pretty different experience to be a cinematographer on a film like this versus a live action film. It's like definitely got me curious. I don't know a ton about it, but you had kind of, I think you had some technical aspects you wanted to discuss to give this film its unique look.
Yeah, so there is, and again, this is something that I am not educated on, to like nearly the degree that either of us are on sort of live action stuff. So I could be wrong, But so one thing you notice that I notice in a lot of Miyazaki's films, and Totoro as well, is that there's a choppiness to the animation, and I think that it's actually a really pleasing style. That, like, there's not a lot of motion blur in the
Right.
sense
There's
that, like,
not
when a character's
motion
moving their
blur.
arm,
Yep.
it's quite, and even just like the way that they talk, their mouth is open and then it's closed, and it's open and then it's
Hmm.
closed. There's not really like a transition between those two elements or those two frames of film as
Right.
they are. Um, and I think the reason for that is, so in Western animation, in, like, whether it's Bugs Bunny, Hanna-Barbera, the Disney movies, that there's a job called tweening, which is done by the tweeners. Funny word, but it stands for in between,
Uh-huh.
or like between. And what that is that you would have the kind of animators, the talented visual artists that were drawing the frames and the characters, wouldn't animate every frame. They would maybe animate, like, let's say, like one, like if there's 24 frames in a second, you would animate frame 1, then maybe frame 12, then maybe frame 24. And you had these people who were called tweeners, who weren't visually, artistically talented in that way. They would literally just do really, really, really crude drawings of what that movement was, and it would be really, really lo-fi. And that's one of the reasons that if you watch an old Disney movie, if you watch Bugs Bunny, even if you watch, like, The Simpsons, when The Simpsons were hand-drawn, you pause on a frame of someone moving their head or someone running or something like that. If you just pause on that frame, your brain doesn't notice it when it's moving at 24
Right.
frames a second. But if you pause on that frame, you'll see that there's, like, sometimes, like, an eye is, like, in the cheek, and there's, like, because it's just kind of getting the feeling of the movement, because of course you
Right.
can't actually get motion blur with animation, hand-drawn frame by frame animation. You have to simulate that motion blur.
Right.
So they would get these people to tween the animation. I think you can probably look up bad tweening on, like, Google.
And see
Yeah,
some
and
of
you can
those
see
examples.
some
Yeah.
examples. Yeah. But it doesn't seem like, and I could be wrong, maybe they just used more talented artists to do the tweening in these
Or
movies,
took more
but
time or had greater
yeah, but it
budget.
doesn't
Yeah.
seem like that was it seems more like, to me, that the artist who was drawing the character was actually drawing each individual frame of the character, which means that, and you brought this up in our discussion before, but that oftentimes it seems like, maybe only 12 of the 24 frames are animated. And that's sort of why there's that choppiness, and that you can kind of see, again, when a mouth is opening, that it's just, when someone is talking, it's just open, closed, open, closed. And it's not to say that that's a bad style. I actually really like it, and I think that it lends a really neat quality to the feel of, the art. But I just think that that's one thing that I noticed in terms of that's probably the limit to my technical, ramblings on this film, because
Yeah. Well,
I
we
don't
could talk
know
about
really
how,
anything
just
else about. Yeah.
we can certainly, talk from kind of a layperson, audience person. Some of the things that really stood out to me. I mean, I think it's clearly it's animated with great care. The characters are hand drawn, and we had talked about how they're so expressive and clearly animated with great care, and a lot of attention to detail. The backgrounds, I think, are watercolor.
Yeah.
And I especially noticed the really beautiful skies. But it's just, yeah, it's extremely pleasing. But the characters are, I mean, you talked about how expressive the characters were, and I think it is really, you know, lends itself to this film. I think, big reason why it has such an emotional connection, and why you were talking about, wow, it's amazing. I empathize with this, 4-year-old character. Um, but I think that's such a big part of it, is that they are drawn so expressively, and not just facial animation. And sometimes the facial animations aren't even really where you're getting a lot of the emotion. Kind of like you said, it's the talking is like, "Wah, wah, wah,"
Yeah.
but it's in all of this body language and body movement, and every little detail is really drawn out.
And you get that from the opening credits when you
Yeah.
see May kind of marching across that the character is so expressive with the way that they move. And that's like a really, really simplistic drawing of May as she marches across the opening credits.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing too is just that Miyazaki's direction. The way that he uses the so to say camera,
Yeah.
in that there's a lot of stillness. Like there's a lot of just kind of observational cameras. Just, again, the one scene that comes to mind is when May sees when she first finds the Totoros running around the garden, and they go under the house, and then she kind of goes over to the like little hole in the bottom, is kind of crouched down beside the hole waiting for them to come out again, and they all sneak by behind her. But the camera, before they sneak by behind her, is still on her for like 10 seconds. Like it's like a really long drawn out shot of just her sitting there looking at the thing. But it just, again, is this feeling of just like, well, she's waiting, we're waiting. And Miyazaki seems to really like to frame far. There's not a ton of like slight detail in terms of like, you don't really get, some animators, you'll notice that like it's all about, they'll always cut to a close-up if there's food, and it'll be this beautiful drawing of food and all the textures, and you'll see, someone, there's texture, and there's detail, and these kind of like high resolution element.
Yeah, like these inserts, like these really,
Miyazaki doesn't seem to, like, he almost lets your mind fill in those details in a lot of instances, that it's often like a lot of wide shots, a lot of extreme long shots of characters just kind of in the spaces. And if you look at the details of the things that are drawn, oftentimes it's not all that detailed. And yet your brain fills those things in. I think that's kind of an interesting element to the movie as well.
Yeah, I mean, the backgrounds, those watercolors. I mean, they're not
fantastic. Yeah,
and you're right. I think there's, especially if you compare them to modern, CGI animated films, Pixar films. The level of detail, just literal detail, is not.
I think Miyazaki does a lot of the watercolors himself.
Oh, that would be, yeah. I mean, it sounds reasonable. I don't know myself, but. But it's not the detail that makes them so expressive. I mean, I think, when you look at composition, color, how space is used, I mean, there's some really beautifully cinematic moments here where all of the techniques that a person would use to create beautiful frame in a live action film. I just, some of them, there are many, but I especially like when they're waiting at the bus stop, when she's got the umbrella. There's just really beautiful light, and that's what I think makes the skies so beautiful in some of this, is that it's the quote unquote lighting. I feel weird saying this because it's not like that's how it's drawn. It's the way that color is used in the actual drawings or paintings. But I keep wanting to say it's like how light is used, because I'm like,
it is. I mean, a lot of cinematographers describe their work is like, you're painting with light, right?
But and it is, but and I think that's kind of shows you how effective it is, that it's like, I'm so compelled to call it light, when of course, well, this is how it was drawn, painted. Yeah. This is how, they created that light. It's not real light. They've actually mimicked light in the way that it was drawn and painted. But extremely effective. I mean, I think, we haven't touched on music. But
I love the soundtrack.
I think it's got this really cool kind of interesting combo of like 80s kind of experimental synthesizer
like moment. Yeah.
I mean, I almost got, like I told you, I almost got like a Tangerine Dream vibe for some of it.
I've got the soundtrack downloaded on my phone.
Yeah,
it's like there's this one particular track on it called "A Haunted House" that's like the best. I don't even like club music, but it's like the best beat drop in the world.
Are you serious? I'll have to go back and listen to that.
But then there's the other ones that, like, it's when they're running around the house right at the beginning. It's just
with the little soot gremlins, they call it. Yeah.
And then there's the Cat Bus theme song that's like kind of a little bit funnier, more whimsical, is great. I think the two songs are a lot of fun too. The opening and closing songs are fun. And so it's Joe Hisaishi, I think is how you pronounce it.
I'm so glad that I'm not the only one that is struggling here.
I just don't want to get it wrong.
I know.
If I did, I apologize.
I understand. Yeah.
And I think that he's done like a lot of the Miyazaki movies. I think his Ponyo score is great. He's always like very interesting, but he does exactly that. Is he often will like pull from inspirations of other sources. I know Philip Glass was a big source for him.
He's done video games too. I don't know if,
Yeah.
but he's scored, and I've played a little bit of one of them, and it's kind of on my list to continue. But yeah, he's actually scored a couple of video games too,
Yeah,
which are
interesting.
I'll probably Ni no Kuni. There's a couple of Ni no Kuni
I do know, yeah.
games which are actually in their own right. They're really beautiful, and I can almost even see how they could be connected to films like this, for sure, visually and thematically. But I'm just learning that right now. I didn't realize he had also scored those. Very interesting. I can see how that would be connected.
But yeah, soundtrack by and large, great.
Yeah. I'll have to go back and check that out separate from the film, just so that I can kind of focus just on that music alone.
And then the performances. So I've seen the
of course.
Japanese version, which I think the performances are great in that.
And I have
also
not,
think
yeah.
that this is a rare occasion where the Disney English dub, which is the Fanning sisters,
And that's what we
Elle
watched.
and what's the older one's name? Elle is the younger one.
Dakota
Fanning, yeah. That they play the Mei and Satsuki, and they do like a phenomenal job.
Yeah, they really do a good job.
I think that there's a really, it's rare that
Them being sisters, I think in real life probably
totally
really
helps.
helps.
Yeah.
And I just want to preface, I was scared. Like when I always, almost without fail, if I ever watch a film, especially if it's the first time I've ever watched it, I absolutely positively want to see that film in its native language, without question. I do not want to watch a dub. So I was hesitant when I asked you. I said, "Hey, which version of the film are we gonna discuss?" Because I almost do feel like they're different versions. I almost do feel like the Japanese version of this film and the English version of this film are almost different versions. It's not the same film, but with different...
you're getting different artists doing their different interpretations of the characters, right?
And so I was hesitant. I was like, "Oh, okay."
And just, I guess, for as a disclaimer, the reason why we did the English version was because we weren't sure that HBO would have the Japanese version. So,
and it wasn't right, and until I actually sat down. Now, just for those of you who are interested, HBO actually does. You can choose if which version you would like to watch. But
if you're in Canada, they're all on Netflix. So,
and we had also heard that this was an accurate and really well done version. And I think you'd read, or maybe hadn't you heard that maybe Miyazaki actually had input, or
I know John Lasseter was the person who was put in charge of the Disney kind of dub, and there's like he went to Japan and was with Miyazaki for a lot of the process and things like that.
So we did kind of feel a little more comfortable than we might normally feel.
But yeah, I'd say watch it in both. I think both I think that I was really, the first time I watched it, pleasantly surprised with how good the Fanning sisters are. I don't think I expected that at all. And the Japanese voice actors, who I'm not familiar with their names because of course they're not big actors here, but they also do a really, really good job. And the one actor who plays May did return for the short film like 15 years later. So the May and the Kitten Bus, which is
interesting,
really fun.
But I think all of the performances are quite good. Obviously, Dakota and Elle, is it Elle?
I think it's Elle, yeah.
They carry a substantial part of the film, but Tim Daly, who plays the father, I think does a really wonderful job. So by the time I kind of got into the film, like 10-15 minutes, I'm like, okay, I don't feel so bad. It's like, but a lot of times, the dub is just, and it's interesting, there was another English dub of this that was done, I think in 89 or so, like right after the film was released. It's my understanding that it was done for like airline viewing or something. Like it was done for Japan Airlines, and then it was I think it was done originally so that you could play on Japan Airlines for international or for English speaking audiences, and then
Because there's a Fox dub.
Well, Fox released that
early
one.
90s.
That's the one. That's the version that Fox released on home video, and so that was there for X number of years. And then I guess the way that they did their deal, the license for that or something ran out, and so then Disney picked it up and redid the dub. Because I guess that original English dub was not considered to be very
it's
good.
not great. Yeah, it's not.
And I think they changed some small but important details, I think, in it a little bit, trying to like anglicize it, I guess would be the term. Whereas this later version doesn't do much of that, if any at all. So it's more literal in its translation and dub. So, but yeah, I think the performances are really quite wonderful, and I had no idea that those sisters did that, and they're pretty darn good actors. Which one is in? There's a show that's on now where one of them is playing Catherine the Great. Maybe it's the younger one.
I think it's the younger one. Yeah,
but
and Elle Fanning also, or Dakota, I think it was Elle Fanning also played Coraline, which was I think that came out in 2007, which was a stop motion film, and
okay,
she's very good in that too. So
yeah, well, I could see where their careers have taken off, because they both seem to be quite talented, and they did do a great job in this film too. Right on. Well, can you think of it? We covered about as much as we could, and we got a little philosophical there for a moment,
which existential,
which I think is fun. We got a little existential, and talking about some, But I appreciate you picking the film. I'm sure I would have seen it eventually at some point, because, like I said, my wife and I kind of are running through these films. But
did Amber join you for the watch this time?
No, she didn't. But I'm gonna suggest it to her, and I definitely would happily watch it again. So I'm sure that we will watch it in the not too distant future together. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun, lighthearted, nostalgic film that kind of just put a little smile in my heart. So
yeah,
it means next time. That means for me, I'll have to pick like a really dark and nihilistic film
Sophie's
to
choice.
Balance that out, on the backside next time. But anyway, well, it's as always, man, it's been a blast. I always enjoy these conversations. I hope our listeners out there have enjoyed it as well. And until next time.
Bye-bye.